Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Brady, and I'm joined today by Douglas and Stephanie Hackney. I've known Doug and Stephanie for coming on 20 years now. They were a big help in the foundation of Overland Journal and Expedition Portal. As successful entrepreneurs themselves, they're also very well traveled. They've traveled numerous continents, two up on a BMW motorcycle. They've done a bunch of open water sailing. And ultimately, they drove a Mitsubishi FUSO FG down the length of the Americas to Ushuaia. We have a great conversation. We were cut a little bit short on time due to some travel requirements, but I hope to have them back on the podcast soon. So please enjoy my conversation with Doug and Stephanie Hackney.
And a special thanks to Treader for their support of this week's podcast. One of the age-old problems of vehicle-dependent adventure travel is something that you probably don't think of very often, and that's insurance. If you've put a lot of money into your truck, chances are that those modifications aren't covered by your current carrier. But now there's Treader. They fill in the gap between what your car insurance company thinks your truck is worth and what it is actually worth to you. You don't have to switch your carrier, and you can use regular insurers that provide the stock stuff while Treader insures the cool gear. Head to Treader.com and check out their easy 5-minute quote process to see if Treader is the solution for you. Again, that's Treader.com, Treadder.com. Thank you again for the support, Treader.
Doug and Stephanie, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
It's great to have you here.
This is an absolute joy, I have to say. I mean, you guys, both of you, have been a part of my entire journey through overlanding. You've both provided me with so much information, advice, insights on being an entrepreneur, on being a traveler. And I mean, just the conversations that all of us have had around campfires and at Overland Expos and time together like we did tonight where we got to go out to have dinner here outside of Austin. Those things are all incredible memories for me. And I would not be where I am today without a lot of your support. So you guys were really a big part of the success that Overland Journal has had, that our industry has had, because you guys provided that kind of feedback and support to so many entrepreneurs as this industry was coming off the ground. So it's a real honor to have you guys on the podcast.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
It's an honor to be here.
Yeah,
Thanks for
absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Well, there's a couple things that come to mind, and because I know a few of the stories, because again, we've spent a lot of time around the campfire, but one of the things that I remember being so interesting as I got to know you, Doug, was, you were an entrepreneur, you were working flat out, but you found these ways of escape. And one of the early things that you did was a BMW M5. And I remember this conversation that you had with yourself around that car. What made you realize that you didn't want to pursue fancy cars, fast cars, that you actually wanted to have travel and experiences be that cornerstone of your life?
Yeah, that was one of those reward. I'd always been a car guy since I was a little kid, so I was deeply immersed in all of that my whole life. Once I had worked and we got to a point where we had a decent outcome with the business, and so that was like my gift to myself was the M5. But the reason why I got that instead of some flashy sports car was I already had sports cars, but I wanted like the Q-ship. It was more fun to me to be driving something that, unless you were a real car person, you didn't know what it was. It was just a 4-door sedan, right? Sitting at a stoplight next to a family in another 4-door sedan. Nobody knew anything was going on. But it was so it was fun. I liked that stealth aspect of it. It was kind of an inside joke.
That was a machine. That was a machine.
Yeah, it was fun.
Well, and I remember the first time that I encountered an M5 was I was going to the Bondurant school to learn to be a little bit better driver, and during a lunch break, this M5 just starts tearing around the track. I mean, smoke from the tires. The thing is sideways more than it's straight, but with precision. And the vehicle comes around and it pulls up and it parks out where we're all standing there now spectating. And the thing has temp plates on it. This is in Arizona at the Bondurant course. And now steps Bob Bondurant. It was his new car. He had just picked the thing up from the dealership, and he flogged it on the racetrack. So, I had always wanted an M5 myself, but I remember one of the things that you told me is that, when you went out in that car, everybody was just talking about the car. They would sit down for lunch, and all they wanted to talk about was the car. There was not any real experiences that were coming from owning it.
Correct. Yeah, that was after we. I needed a little break. That's from after the hard run. You know what it's like to build a business, and I'd push for about 12, 14 years, and I just needed a break. So I'd been writing since I was 10, and we'd done a lot of off-road. I got into off-road after my sport bike got rear-ended by another motorcycle. And while that bike was being rebuilt, my old friend Avery Ennis said, you got to try this dual sport thing. It's really a lot of fun. I've been getting into that. It's a lot of fun. So I got a dual sport bike that got me into off-road riding. And then I got hooked up through Avery to a bunch of riders in Southern California, and I ended up doing a bunch of riding with them, some big trips down the length of Baja, from the border down to Cabo every year. And that, got me off into a whole different world. And then that's with that same group. And Steph and I did some rides. We did a ride in central Mexico where we went 2 up on a DR.
Awesome.
It was so fun. It was so fun.
The most fun we've ever had.
Yeah, it was
simple bike.
It was
just went.
And on that little tiny DR, I think we put a tool pack on the back to make the seat long enough so I could be on it.
Sit on it. Yeah, it was really fun. And I wanted a way where I could share some of the, when you ride off road with a bike that's reasonably capable, you can get up into some places where nobody else can see that except people on foot. Or like a mountain bike, or somebody that's really wants to be there, right? So you see all these amazing places, and you got all these wonderful smells and sights and so on, and experiences. And I wanted a way where I could share some of that with Steph. So we built this big GS 1150, and we went all over the world on that. And then places where we couldn't get that bike into easily, we'd rent something local for that part of the world or that continent or whatever, right? So our first trip was to Africa. So we went to Africa for a couple of months or whatever it was. We came back from that trip to Africa. It was our first trip overseas. We built that bike for this whole year of adventure and stuff. And I came back from that trip, and we had some experiences on that trip that really changed us. I'm sure you can identify with this.
Yeah.
We came back different people than when we had left. And part of that for me was I'd been a car guy my whole life. Everything was all about cars and motorcycles and all that kind of stuff, and toys and all that stuff. And I joined this M5 owners group, and we'd go out and flog our M5s around the mountains around, Southern California. And so when we came back, there was one of these coming up. So I went out and did the drive with all the guys, and we went to lunch. We always went to a big lunch, and the room is full of 30, 40 of us, however many there were. During the lunch, I got up and went to the restroom. And when I came back from the restroom, I was walking through all these M5 owners, and that's when it hit me that I no longer really had anything in common with all these people.
Yeah.
I had lost that thing that resonated, right? And that was true for not only that aspect of my life, but for both of us, really. You could just take that vibration and just extrapolate it out across our life as a whole. So that's really what led that, not the M5 thing, but this phenomenon of you come back a changed person and everything about you is different. And it took a while. So then we did other trips for that next year or year and a half or whatever, motorcycling all over the world. And that's when we came back and sold and gave away everything, sold everything, and then headed out. And that 6-month sabbatical turned into 10 years. And,
And Steph, for you, what were some of the things that you enjoyed most about traveling on the BMW? Like, what were some of the things that you think you would have done different, maybe, or what were the things that you liked the most about that kind of travel?
I think because I was a military brat, right? So I had traveled a lot in my life, but to what I would call very civilized places, right? And in an environment that was not really adventurous. So when we got that bike, and Doug first told me, we're going to Africa and we're going to do all of sub-Saharan Africa, and he handed me these 2 bags, which were basically the size of camera bags, and he said, "This is for all your stuff." And I said, "Like for my clothes?" And he said, "No, all your stuff."
Everything.
and I remember I cried. I was like, "You got to be kidding me. I can't fit everything I need for like 7-8 weeks in this," right? And when you make that first trip to a place like Africa that you've never been to and all you've ever seen are National Geographics, right? You have this vision of what it's going to be. And that first trip we did with a group, right? So we had our bike shipped over and it was brand new. We had it all custom done to make it really great for this kind of travel. And we got there, and that initial thing is like, oh, we're really going to go do this, right? And you're out there like a week or 2 weeks and you think, we don't need to be in a group, and this is really cool, and it's not what you envision it's going to be, right? And while we were there, we had lived in San Diego, and San Diego had horrendous fires. And we happened to stop in Namibia in the middle of nowhere, and I went into the bar of a hotel to get some water. And I walked in, and here's CNN, and a guy is standing in the bay in San Diego, and he's saying, "And San Diego is on fire." And literally the sky is red behind him. And I'm looking and I'm thinking, that's where we live, right? So everything we owned, our house, everything we'd worked so hard for was there. And my first thought was, wow, what would we do if it all burns up while we're here, right? So I came out and I told Doug, and he said, okay. And then the next 2 hours of riding, we just talked through our headphones, like, what's important in life and what would we do? Would we replace all our stuff? And by the time we got done with that and got to the first, the next hotel, we both just looked at each other and said, well, if it's gone, it's gone. We won't replace it, and we're just going to keep doing what we're doing.
What a change in perspective.
Yeah.
Because Southern California really pushes you in onto the hamster wheel. It really does.
It does.
And most people stay on it their whole life.
Yeah. It's a beautiful place to live, and we enjoyed the chapter there, and I had grown up there off and on through my childhood, so it was very comfortable. And I think that's the thing, is you get comfortable, right? And then you make money and you spend money, and you kind of get on that hamster wheel of generating cash and spending cash, and it just becomes what you do. And that break and that sort of being forced to look at what's important, what do we want to do with the rest of our lives, that changed us, and I had mentioned to you that we had some family members and friends who their lives ended very quickly, very suddenly, and we just kind of looked at each other and said, is this it? Is this all there is, right? Or could we go do something else? And that Africa trip on that bike, that was it. I mean, that completely changed the trajectory of what we were going to do, for the next chapter.
And the world also changes. We certainly change as travelers, but the world also changes so quickly. I remember sitting with you guys looking at your photographs of Damascus in Syria, and it looks nothing like the moment that you were there in time, in history. Will it be beautiful again? Probably. But when you were there, it was probably as beautiful as it is ever going to be.
That's very true of Aleppo, certainly. When we first came back, people would ask us, hey, where would you go back to again? And I would typically tell them Syria, just partly for the shock value of very few Americans travel. If they go overseas, it's often to a gated, all-inclusive resort or something like that. They don't have the chance to really immerse in another culture. That's one advantage of motorcycle travel, is you must interact with the locals. When we went out in the truck, it's very easy to cocoon yourself in the truck, right? But the bike, you have to eat, you have to sleep, right? So you're always interacting with the locals. And when you're in that part of the world, Hospitality is part of the culture. It's a maxim, it's a mandate of the culture and the religion to welcome travelers. And we were welcome. Welcome doesn't begin to describe what it was like to travel in that part of the world, not just Syria, but that part of the world as a whole. We had wonderful experiences in Syria, met some fantastic people, made some great friends. And then, of course, later, we've got a picture of us at Palmyra. We've got the bike parked and we're standing next to it. And what's behind us was later destroyed. So this is the lesson is if you want to see something in the world, you need to go, and you need to go now, because there's no guarantee that place will be there later for you to go see. Circumstances, borders can be closed, wars can break out, right?
Your own health can change.
And your circumstances can drive that. That's what some of these things that happened to our family and our friends that drove us to our decision to leave are part of that, right? People that had planned and waited for this great chapter. We're at the age now, this chapter we're in now is typically where people have worked and saved and scrimped and planned and cut out things and collected the scrapbook and, done the research and got maps with highlighter lines all over them and stuff, waiting for the day. When now we're retired and now we can go, right? And we had seen so many examples in our lifetimes of friends and family that had all that, and then one or the other of them, health-wise, financial situation, prevented them from realizing that dream. And we didn't want that to be us. So we decided to go out early when we were young and we were healthy, and our life circumstances, our family circumstances with our kids and our parents at that time, we had this window of opportunity. So we decided to take it. So we did.
Yeah, I think about that with my own mom. I mean, my mom and dad, they saved their whole life, and my dad had a successful career, and within just a few years of retiring, she developed Alzheimer's. So it's just, you don't know. And and a lot of times our parents and generations that came before us, they are a proctor of life lessons. They do help us see what's important and what we need to change. And for me, that was a really important lesson, was seeing what my mom and dad went through and reminding myself that, like, if you want to do something, you better make a plan to do it. Like, if it's important to you.
You've probably experienced this too in your travels, that when we were out and we would meet people out around the world and they would ask us what we're doing and so on, the older people and the younger people would be so enthusiastic. Oh, what you're doing is fantastic. This is great, and so on. But the people in the middle, right, not so enthusiastic. And you probably experienced this a little bit too. But when you make this choices have consequences. Choices create chapters. Life is composed of chapters. And when you make a choice like this, we're going to go travel full time for as long as our health holds out, as long as our money holds out, or as long as it makes sense, right? And, for most people, that turns out to be 3-ish years. And then, okay, we did this, and now it's the next thing. Might be a different form of travel or a different whatever. But when you make that choice and you walk away, keep in mind, we were living in the San Diego area in one of the nicest cities around San Diego, near the beach, in beautiful home. We were very fortunate. We worked very hard. We had great friends, and all that. It was like the idyllic life. It was the American dream. And we were married before, so when we got married, we had at least two of everything, right? Combining all this together, and we walked away from all that. And especially the people in the middle of those age bands, they really struggled with that. Because they were both, typically both couples are working like crazy, striving to get to what we had, where we were. And here we'd reached the top of the mountain. And here we are coming back down that mountain saying, yeah, it was okay, but we want to go do something different. And they're crawling and sliding down the rocks, trying to get up to that peak. And it was really difficult for many people in our lives. And it will change the relationships that you have with other people. And that's you just need to be ready for that, right? It's part of the trade-off you're going to make. We left at the peak of our earning potential, right? So there was a financial cost to pay, and there's career costs to pay, and all that, right? And this is just one of those costs that you are going to pay if you make this choice, right? To us, in balance, it was the right choice, and the rewards outweighed, some of the costs that we had to pay along
And
the
the
way.
experiences that you two have had together. I mean, Stephanie, one of the things that come to mind for me is, like, how do you feel like it changed your guys' relationship?
Well,
This travel.
we talked earlier about, it's going to make or break a relationship, right? I think that oftentimes when we've spoken into overlanding groups, or we've talked with couples who've maybe pulled us aside and said, how did you guys do this? And oftentimes, most often, it's a guy wanting to go do this, and he's sort of dragging his wife along. And the guys will say to me, well, how do you get a woman to want to do this? Or how did he get you talked into this? And I've always said, you know what, if that person really doesn't have the drive or the desire, or at least the openness to the idea, it's probably not going to end well.
And it's not fair to the other person either.
Yeah.
To drag somebody along.
And I think as you get older, people kind of get set in their ways, and they get set in what they like, right?
Yeah.
And oftentimes what I see is that even if both couples have high-powered jobs and, work a lot of hours, they kind of get to a point, and especially for women, if they have family around and grandkids around, right, they really want to be there for them. And so sometimes they get to that point where the guy's like, okay, I'm ready to go off and do the thing. And she's like, I really just want to be here with my grandkids. And there's nothing wrong with either of those scenarios.
Sure.
But it doesn't always work for the couple.
Yeah.
And so, I've always said you need to just sit down and talk through the scenarios and be really open and honest and give each other permission to say, I'm done, right? Because you could go out and try it, and it's really great for a year. It's really great for 2 years. Or it could be 6 weeks out of the driveway, and one of you decides, you know what, this doesn't work for me.
Right.
So it's important to have that conversation before you go.
Sure.
So that
What's the exit
so
plan?
it's not so it's not a shock, and so that you know how you're going to handle that.
Yeah.
That's
smart. That's wise.
Yeah, we were going to go on a sailboat, right? That was really Doug's vision, was to do this on a sailboat. And I'm deathly afraid of drowning. I get seasick, the whole deal. And I thought, okay, I can do this. So, I got certified because I thought the more in control I feel, the better I'm going to feel about this. And ultimately, I couldn't do it, right? But we had talked about scenarios, and what was most important at that point when we had that extremely difficult situation that I just cannot go by ocean, right?
Yeah.
We're going to have to figure out something else. Doug was willing to be open and say, hey, how else could we do this, right? And it doesn't always work, so I think that it's very important that you as a couple be honest with each other, but then you as an individual, be honest with yourself and allow yourself to change, because you are going to change through this process. And really that's the goal. You want to be open and change and grow and learn. And if you're somebody who just wants things to be as they are, I think it's going to be pretty challenging.
Yeah, I may want to pick a different hobby, huh?
Yeah.
That's one of the things that I've always appreciated about you two, and this is not to say that times like that aren't very challenging, but anytime I've seen you guys make a significant shift, whether it be in your professional lives or in travel or whatever, you guys have always found a way to hold each other close, like that the goal was to keep yourselves as a unit together, to work it out. And it doesn't mean that it wasn't difficult, but what it took, that took a lot of courage for you, Doug, to say, like, this is something that I really wanted to do, but Steph's more important than a sailboat.
Yeah, in the end,
not everybody can do that.
Yeah, in the end, I loved her and love her more than I love sailing, which is saying a lot.
Yeah, but it's true. Like is the thing that's important. And kind of along those lines, Doug, why don't you share something that you're most proud of Stephanie for, how she's evolved in your travels together?
Being able to go out on the bike with those two little pannier liners, going from, we had, big closets, and all the stuff.
And business travel.
Yeah, and at that point, Steph's idea of camping was a hide in the woods. And she was...
Still sounds nice.
Yeah, she had the openness and the courage and the sense of adventure enough, right, to get on the back of a motorcycle with her crazy husband and go bop around the world, on it, and go out and learn and be different and have that courage to, this is we had moved back to the town that she grew up in. So talk about being comfortable in your space and stuff. And she could have easily, I said more than once, she'll never leave this zip code. But, we'll be here the rest of our lives in this zip code. And instead, she had the drive and the desire and the openness to go to, it's that courage to push your limits, to push yourself out of your comfort zone, right? Because that's where the rewards come.
Yeah.
If you stay within your comfort zone, you're not risking anything, so there's not going to be any reward, right? Risk, reward. And that risk to push yourself out of what is comfortable every day and so on, and beyond that journey of discovery, and not just discovery of the outside, but it's mostly about a journey of discovery of what's inside, right?
And that really informs our decisions going forward. I mean, if we're doing things we love with people we love, life's going to be pretty decent.
Mm-hmm. Doesn't get any better.
It's going to be pretty
but
decent.
I think you have to have the trust, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I would not have done that. I can think of other people I, dated,
Sure.
never would have happened, right? But I trusted Doug, and and when you're doing that kind of travel in some of the places we were, you're trusting that person with your life.
No doubt.
But you also have to trust yourself.
Mm.
You have to trust that. I've been through a lot of tough things. I've had a lot of change in my life, and I'm just going to do the thing, right?
Yeah.
But when you're going out with a partner, there has to be trust there, and I think you still have challenges. We've been through couples counseling. We worked together for a lot of years.
Yep.
That was challenging at times.
Yep.
But it always came back to what's the most important thing. And, and even when you're out traveling, right, you can have really wonderful days and then everything goes horribly wrong.
For sure.
And it's how you deal with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And, you can be at each other's throats and an hour later be sitting watching a sunset with a cocktail and saying, wow, we made it through that, right?
Yeah. Well,
and
you guys,
it makes you
have done that.
stronger.
I want to thank all of you that are listening for your support of the Overland Journal podcast. There are times that our listeners reach out and ask for ways that they can support the podcast directly. And the best way to do that, the very best way to do that, is to subscribe to Overland Journal, the print magazine. It can be accessed on our website digitally, and you'll receive a beautiful 130 to 150 page book 5 times a year, which is all of the very best overland adventures that are occurring in the modern day. Historically, we do in-depth evaluations of equipment that's featured as field tested, and also our famous main gear reviews, where we still declare an editor's choice, very detailed pros and cons, very deliberate testing of equipment in the field all the way around the world. So you can subscribe to Overland Journal by going to overlandjournal.com. And for our podcast listeners, just for all of you listening, we actually have a 20% off code, and that code is Overland Podcast. So if you use the code Overland Podcast, you'll get 20% off your next order. Thank you again for all of your support.
You guys have done that. I mean, Steph, it's been so awesome to watch also your career. I mean, the things that the restarts that you've had, starting your own businesses and building them up, and like some of the stuff you were doing in the crafting world was incredible. I mean, that takes an enormous amount of courage, to Doug's point. The executive positions that you still hold within leadership, within the companies that you work for, I mean, that all speaks to your courage, not only for travel, but for life. And that, I think, gives a lot of opportunities going forward. So,
Well, thanks. Yeah.
So same question for you. What are some of the things that you're most proud of Doug for in his travels or his journey as a traveler?
I think being open to having the plan not work out. Right.
That can be hard.
So we had the sailboat plan. I mean, we've been married almost 30 years. There's been a lot of plans that were put in place that didn't work out. And being able to just say, okay, we're going to shift gears. We're going to go do the next thing.
I love the fact that you didn't say pivot.
Yeah. No. I
Shift gears is so much better.
You will also never hear me say win-win.
Or synergy.
Thank you. Too many years in the corporate world. People always say to me, well, how come you don't do your lectures via PowerPoint? I said, I have done all the PowerPoint presentations I'm ever going to do in my life.
Nobody wants to see any of them.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to see any of them.
Yeah. So I think being open and I think being able to say, I don't know. I think that's probably the best thing about Doug, and I think you're very much this way too, that somebody will come to you with a problem and they want you to fix it. Right. And he was a consultant for many years. So people come to you with problems. That's what your role is.
Sure.
Is to solve problems. And he would say, yeah, sure, no problem. Maybe having no idea how he's actually going to do it,
Sure.
but he'd figure it out.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's something to really admire, because not everybody can do that. Right. That's a gift. And it's something he honed over the years. And that's something when you're out there and you're problem solving, right? Whether your vehicle breaks down or the hotel you thought you were going to stay at doesn't exist anymore,
right.
Or you think you're going to bring your bikes into Jordan and oh, by the way, well, you don't have the right paperwork, and you're standing in the middle of the desert and you got to figure out how you're going to make it happen.
Yep.
So I think that's, he's very resourceful.
I think that adaptability is a hallmark of a good traveler.
And a good entrepreneur.
True. Yeah, true.
There's a lot of, I would, when we came back and I was back doing entrepreneurial teaching and stuff, one thing that I would tell my students is that, because they're very curious about this whole, you took 10 years off and traveled the world, because that's what everybody is working toward, right? I told them that full-time travel, meaning you're out, you're not coming back every 2 weeks, you're out, you're traveling full-time, that's your gig. That is the only thing I've ever found in life that comes close to the set of challenges and rewards that you get from entrepreneurship.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective.
It's different, maybe a superset, maybe a subset, but there's a lot of overlap in that Venn diagram between those two things: full-time international travel and entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Every day you have no idea. You might have a general framework of what you think is going to happen that day, of the set of challenges that you're going to need to overcome, but you've lived this for 20 years.
Yeah, long periods of being terrified with short stints of beautiful sunsets.
Right, yeah. Ranging from it's Thursday afternoon, how do I make payroll this week?
Of course, yeah, absolutely. And those are the things that I think have helped me probably in both directions. Is travel has helped make me a little bit more resilient as an entrepreneur, and entrepreneurship probably gave me the set of skills to say, why not? Let's throw on a helmet and go.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, you guys ended up shifting from the motorcycle, and you were looking at sailboats for a little bit, but then you ended up building one of the most epic overland builds of the history of overlanding, at least in North America. And I believe that all that stuff is still on expeditionportal.com somewhere, where you, there were hundreds of thousands of views of that thread as you built FUSO with a camper on the back. What kind of made you decide that was the type of vehicle that you wanted to build? What brought you to that point?
Well, Steph mentioned we had planned and worked for a couple of years to get certified and trained to sail up to a 52-foot boat in any weather condition on any ocean of the world, and so on. And then it just wasn't going to work. But I had already pushed the go button on the financial model. So every day the number is getting smaller, right? And
we had no house.
We'd already sold the house and everything. So I had to come up with an option, and I was not a truck guy. I was a car guy and a motorcycle guy. I owned a farm for a short time in central Wisconsin, and I had a old rusted out 4-wheel drive Ford pickup, 3/4 ton.
Nice.
As a wood hauler, we'd haul the wood down out of the woods. That was it. That was my entire truck experience, right? Other than my dad had a pickup when I was a kid and that kind of thing, and we had trucks on the farm, right? But I wasn't a truck guy. I was not an off-road truck guy.
Sure.
Right? But now I have to put this together. So I started off with a Land Cruiser. That was going to be it. Because when we were out around the world on the motorcycle, the only vehicle that we saw everywhere that was always working was a Land Cruiser.
That's the truth.
Right?
Or
So,
Tacoma.
I mean, a Hilux, right?
Yeah.
So it was either a Hilux, which I think is probably the most populous vehicle. Because remember, we were out in the bush. When we were out on the bike, we went to developing countries, and we stayed as far out in the bush as we could get.
Yep.
And so we saw the either Hilux, right, or a Land Cruiser. So we came back, and was it Christo Slee?
Yeah,
Is that
sure.
right?
Yeah.
So I tracked down Christo, called him up, and what a wonderful human being. He spent hours on the phone with me convincing me that this is the wrong choice.
Yeah, no, he's such an honorable guy.
I mean, I was, here I am, right? The clock's ticking. I'm going to send you a blank check. I'm going to sign it. Christo, you do whatever you got to do. We got to get going, right? And he's like, no, this is not the right choice for you. And he gave me basically your lesson, right? Which is there's the types of vehicles. A live around the vehicle or a live in the vehicle. And based on our use case, what we had in mind, because we're coming out of a boat scenario where we want our own head, our own galley, our own berth, right? And he's thinking, living around the vehicle isn't going to work for what you guys want to do. You need to be thinking about like the next class of vehicle up, right? So now I'm into a totally foreign world, right? So now I've got to look at like a mid-sized truck in the U.S. market that's four-wheel drive, and I need a cab over because I need to maximize the payload capacity because I don't want to lose the hood length and stuff. And you could either buy like an international, line truck, like you see like utilities use, you're still losing the hood length. But for cab over, for a factory cab over, the FUSO was the only one that I could get, right? And if I went up a weight class, then I had to have somebody modify it to put the four-wheel drive on it. Yeah. And I wanted to keep the chassis factory if possible, right? So we chose that FUSO, and we were inspired by, we stopped and saw them in Vancouver. The gentleman and his wife who took a FUSO and put a trailer camper on the back of it, a Bigfoot trailer camper on the back of it, and took it around the world. That was our inspiration. But because I was a bike guy, I wanted to have a garage to put some little dirt bikes in, so we used a pickup camper and plopped that down on the back of the FUSO. And I knew a guy that designs and builds the Baja race vehicles, the pro race trucks, the truck class. And he agreed to help fabricate this thing, right? And, it's like, hey, we're putting a camper on the back of a truck. How hard can this be?
I remember the minutia of fasteners and everything that you went into. Unbelievable.
Yeah. I'm not...
That thing will be on this earth, or at least the components, long after all of us are gone.
Yeah. Right. So two major lessons there. I built that thing to last 40 years, and we really only needed it for 4 years.
Sure.
And I made the classic mistake of doing something one time, right? So I made all the rookie mistakes. I had no iteration available to me because of the compressed time frame. I couldn't iterate on this. I couldn't build it, learn lessons, sell that one, let's do another one, do it right this time. I didn't have time for that. I had to go out with what I made. So I'd never designed a truck before. I'd never designed an overlanding vehicle before. I took all the marine systems that I spent years researching in sailing and stuffed them into this conglomeration, this mashup, right?
Yeah.
And then put it all together. So, fortunately, we had a very patient friend in Southern California that let me use his shop to do this project in. And John Lee, shout out, the most patient man on earth.
Yeah.
It was a great build. I never laughed so much in my life except with John when he'd come back and help and just be around, and with the Amish carpenters that I hired to do the renovation on that farm in Wisconsin.
That's so good.
Yeah, two of they were the funniest group of people as a group that I've ever been around, and John was just fabulously valuable as a friend and a support and so on through that. So anyway, at long last, after a lot of work, we finally got it put together. But I would always recommend, especially if your goal is the overlanding, by a series-built vehicle. If your goal is to build the vehicle and research it, and then that's the goal, which is okay. It's awesome. It's okay, but then make that your goal, right? Be clear about what it is that you really. What's your food pellet in this? Is your food pellet the vehicle and the research and finding the right component and buying just the right thing and putting it on and getting the picture and all that? And that's okay. It's all good.
Yeah.
Or is your goal, is your food pellet, I want to get out there and see the world, right? If so, then fly to the continent you want to go visit, buy something that's made and serviced there that everybody on every corner knows how to fix, and there's parts everywhere in between the corners. And go drive that continent, drive that thing into the ground, rinse, repeat. When you're done with that continent, fly to a different continent, do the same thing.
Yep.
That's there are very, very few, the Hilux, right? There are very, very few vehicles that are like world universal.
Yeah,
the FUSO was one of them, strangely
for sure.
enough. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it was the delivery vehicle in pretty much every small village around the world.
Hi, Scott here. I just wanted to take a minute to talk a little bit about expeditionportal.com. Expeditionportal.com is our website, and it's also our community forum. We are celebrating 20 years of expeditionportal.com this year in 2025, and there are nearly 300,000 members on the community forum that talk about incredibly diverse topics all around the world. Unique vehicles, things like Land Cruisers and Land Rovers, and what to do at the border with Ethiopia and Africa, all the way to some of the favorite campsites and adventure stories from the community. We also have the homepage, which is filled with nearly 6,000 articles that are all available to you for free right there on expeditionportal.com. We have 2 to 5 articles per day that go up on the website that are written by our very experienced staff, which includes global travelers like Graham Bell and Ashley Giordano. I have many articles on there and many contributors like Dan Grech and others from around the world. So please take a minute and check out expeditionportal.com. It's a great way to support the podcast and to connect with the community.
And like you've always said, Doug, it's, go now, go light, go now.
Go sooner with less rather than later with more.
Yeah.
They sell stuff out there.
Yeah.
Right? And we were in the truck for how long? For like 11 months, I think, in South America. And we took 1,100 pounds of stuff out of the truck that we had never touched.
And just gave it away. So, and then that would be my input on this, is that you have to think about, is your goal to go do four-wheeling, right? Is your goal to be off as rugged a place as you can be, and that it's all about the driving, right? Because for a lot of people, it is really about the driving and being as adventurous as you can be with the driving. For us, this was about going and exploring the countries and meeting the people and learning the cultures and finding the best place to buy bread and, those kinds of things. And it was our house. So we were not going to risk it on roads that we thought might be impassable or that we might get ourselves into trouble. Because you're kind of remote and you can't rely on AAA to show up to haul you out.
Your risk profile does change quite a bit.
It does.
And that vehicle was such an inspiration to so many people. I remember all of us following you. I remember me following your journey. We got the chance to work together before you left on some training, and that was such a joy. And I wish we had more time. I'm actually going to be hopping in a few minutes to do a couple last recordings for the new book, so I'm excited about that. And I wish we had a lot more time to talk, so we're going to have to arrange another moment to get you guys on the podcast. We'll do a part 2.
Sure.
So we can talk more about how your experience was in South America. You had one of the most crazy stories that I have ever heard in overlanding happen while you guys were down there, and maybe we'll be able to talk about that on the next podcast. And then what's next for you guys that you want to share?
Well, we've always wanted to go back out. We came, warning sign here. When we came back, we ended up down here around Austin, Texas, which is a very sticky town. People get transferred in here for work and they won't leave. They'll quit their job before they'll leave. People come here for grad school. They love it so much they never leave. There's a lot going on. It's a great area. We came in here. We just thought we'd try it for 6 months after we came back. And here we are, however many, 16 years later or whatever. And I got back involved in doing a bunch of startups, and Steph did startups and then got in this market segment, this career she's in now. And so we ended up like a lot of people, right, where you get back in the comfort. And but our long-term goal was always to go back out.
Yeah.
When we get into, I supposedly retired a couple of years ago, but I just sent a proposal out for some management consulting yesterday. So I'm still involved and, keep my fingers involved and stuff. And, when it gets to the point where Steph really loves what she does, and she's like the world expert on what she does now, and she loves her market segment and stuff. So I don't know, when she gets, when she feels like she's, ready for the next thing, then we'll go back out and explore the world somewhere.
Go get some new stamps on the passports.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's important that, the last few times we went out and the last times we took breaks, it was all about things happening in the world around us or with people we knew that triggered us to go.
Yeah.
And each time we did it, it happened very fast. So we're getting some messages. So, at some point, I think we might have an update.
I love that. Well, you two have been an absolute inspiration to me. I count you as some of my closest friends. We've had a lot of memories together. We've known each other for coming on 20 years now, and it is truly an honor for me to finally get to sit down and do the podcast with you. And I know that we're going to have a part 2 because there's just too much to still talk about. So thank you both for being on the podcast.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.